In the summer of 1957, the sound coming out of Detroit wasn't music. It was a warning. Deep, metallic, sharp, different from anything that had come before. A new kind of V8 barked to life inside a Chevrolet test car, the exhaust note echoing off concrete walls and factory floors with an authority that made everyone within earshot stop what they were doing and listen. Engineers smiled. They knew what they had created. They understood that the machine rumbling on that test stand represented something entirely new for Chevrolet, something that would change everything. Rivals didn't smile. They heard that sound and understood exactly what it meant. War was coming, a different kind of war than Detroit had ever seen. A war measured in cubic inches and horsepower and quarter-mile times. A war that would consume billions of dollars and reshape the entire American automobile industry. Because this engine wasn't just another small block. It was big, heavy, angry, and it was about to start an arms race that Chevrolet had no idea how to finish. Most people think the Chevy 348 was just an oddball, a weird stepping stone, a footnote in automotive history that gets mentioned briefly before moving on to discuss the legendary 409, the engine that gets a song and a legacy, the engine that everyone actually remembers. But that's not the real story. The truth is, the 348 didn't just power cars, it triggered an arms race, one that Chevrolet ultimately couldn't survive, and it all started with fear. In the mid-1950s, Detroit was changing fast. Faster than anyone could have predicted just a decade earlier. Post-war America had money in its pockets and time on its hands. The interstate highway system was spreading across the nation like concrete arteries, connecting cities and opening up possibilities that previous generations couldn't have imagined. Speed limits were suggestions, gas was cheap, and a growing obsession with performance was taking hold of the American consciousness. Horsepower numbers were creeping up every year. What seemed impressive in 1950 looked quaint by 1955. What felt fast in 1955 would feel slow by 1958. The escalation was relentless, and bragging rights mattered almost as much as sales figures, maybe more. Every manufacturer was watching what the others were doing. Spies were everywhere. Test cars were photographed on public roads. Engineers changed jobs and brought secrets with them. Detroit was a small town pretending to be a big industry, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Ford was pushing bigger V8s with every model year. Their engineers were working on something massive, something that would eventually become the legendary FE series. Chrysler was quietly developing what would become the Hemi Terror, an engine architecture so dominant in racing that sanctioning bodies would eventually ban it just to give everyone else a chance. Mopar engineers were solving problems that Chevrolet hadn't even identified yet, and Chevrolet had a problem. The small block V8, introduced in 1955, was brilliant. Revolutionary even. Lightweight that transformed handling. Compact dimensions that fit in engine bays designed for 6 cylinders. High revving characteristics that made it feel eager and alive. It was arguably the most important engine design of the 20th century, and its descendants would power everything from economy cars to race winners for the next 7 decades. But it had limits. You could only bore and stroke a thin wall casting so far before things got ugly. The small block was designed for efficiency, not endless expansion. Push the displacement too far and the cylinder walls became dangerously thin. Push the stroke too far and the geometry of the rotating assembly became compromised. There was a ceiling, and Chevy engineers were already bumping against it. Trucks needed more torque than the small block could provide. Heavy sedans needed low-end grunt to move their considerable weight. Performance customers wanted engines that pulled like freight trains, not high-revving screamers that needed to be wound out to make their power. They wanted torque, real torque, the kind that pushed you back in your seat from idle. So Chevrolet made a decision that would change everything. Instead of scaling up the small block, instead of trying to make a fundamentally compact design, do things it was never intended to do, they went in a completely different direction. They designed something entirely different. a new, big engine family, wide, tall, massive. It was called the W series, named for the distinctive shape of the valve covers that would identify these engines at a glance. The W looked aggressive, purposeful, different from anything else on the road. And the first shot fired in this new horsepower war was the Chevy 348. At a glance, the 348 looked strange. Even experienced mechanics who had seen every engine Detroit produced would do a double take when they first lifted the hood on a 348-powered car. The valve covers were scalloped in an unusual pattern. The deck surface wasn't flat like every other engine they had ever worked on. The combustion chamber wasn't even fully in the head where it belonged. It was partially in the block itself, formed by the angled deck surface that gave the W series its distinctive appearance. That design choice would haunt Chevrolet for years. But at the time, engineers thought they were being clever. The angled deck allowed for different compression ratios using the same basic head casting. Just machine the deck at a different angle, and you change the chamber volume. Elegant, in theory, problematic, in practice. But on paper, the numbers looked good. Good enough to get the program approved. Good enough to move forward with production. The 348 had a 4.125-inch bore and a 3.25-inch stroke, giving it 348 cubic inches of displacement. That was substantially larger than anything Chevrolet had offered before. Compression ratios ranged from around 9.5.1 in standard applications up to 11.0.1 in high-performance trim, numbers that seemed aggressive for the era and demanded premium fuel. Horsepower started around 250 in basic truck versions, adequate for commercial duty but nothing exciting. Jump to better cams and improved carburation, and output climbed to 280 and then 305 horsepower. The top of the range came with triple two-barrel carburetors, an exotic setup that peaked at 315 horsepower. Torque was the real selling point. Over 350 pound-feet in some configurations, delivered low in the RPM range and hitting hard like a hammer. This was an engine designed to move weight, to accelerate heavy cars with authority, to make American land yachts feel like sports cars. In 1958, that sounded impressive. It sounded like the future. Chevrolet dropped the 348 into full-size Impalas, Bel Airs, and Biscaynes. These were the flagship models, the cars that represented Chevrolet's image to the buying public, the cars that sat in showroom windows and drew crowds on Saturday afternoons. The marketing was aggressive. Chevrolet's advertising department created names that promised dominance. Turbo thrust, super turbo thrust, words that sounded powerful and modern and slightly dangerous. Words that suggested jet-age technology applied to automobile engines. Words that made young buyers dream and older buyers feel young again. And for a moment, it worked. On the street, the 348 felt strong. It pulled heavy cars effortlessly from stoplights, the torque curve hitting right where drivers needed it most. It made noise that turned heads. It felt modern in a way that previous Chevrolet engines hadn't managed. This was something new, something exciting, something worth talking about. Drag racers took notice. They saw an engine with displacement they could work with and started experimenting. NASCAR teams took notice. They saw potential for the high-speed ovals where torque and durability mattered as much as peak horsepower. The 348 was making friends. But then the real world stepped in, because the 348 had a problem. Actually, several problems. The W series design put the combustion chamber partially in the block, not fully in the head, where conventional wisdom said it belonged. That meant poor flame travel as the spark ignited the air-fuel mixture. The flame front had to travel across an irregular surface, navigating the transition between block and head. Combustion was uneven. Some areas of the chamber ran hotter than others. Hot spots developed. At high RPM, things got unstable fast. The heads themselves didn't flow particularly well compared to what the competition was developing. Big valves helped move air, but the port design was compromised by that angled deck surface. The intake and exhaust passages had to work around the unusual geometry, and aerodynamics suffered as a result. You could make torque with a 348. That wasn't the problem. The engine delivered on its fundamental promise of low-end grunt. But making sustained high horsepower? That was another story. Racers started pushing the 348 harder. That's what racers do. They find an engine with potential and they try to unlock it. Higher compression ratios squeezed more power from each combustion event. More aggressive cam profiles kept the valves open longer. More carburation dumped more fuel into those hungry cylinders, and the engine started pushing back. Bearings wore prematurely under the stress. Pistons scuffed against cylinder walls as thermal expansion pushed tolerances to their limits. Detonation became a constant threat, the uncontrolled combustion hammering away at internals with forces they were never designed to handle. Mechanics complained that the engines ran hot, especially under sustained load. Road racing exposed the 348's cooling weaknesses ruthlessly. You could sprint with a 348, but you couldn't run a marathon. One NASCAR crew chief reportedly said, "It pulls like a mule for 5 laps, then it starts complaining, then it breaks." That wasn't a recipe for championships. Meanwhile, Ford and Chrysler were watching, closely, carefully, taking notes on every 348 failure, every weakness, every limitation that became apparent as racers pushed the engine harder. Ford was developing the FE series, with flat deck surfaces and better breathing and an architecture that could be expanded almost indefinitely. Their engineers were solving the problems that the 348 was exposing. Chrysler's Hemi architecture, though expensive and heavy, could handle brutal RPM and extreme compression without complaint. They were building engines designed to win wars. Chevrolet had built one designed to open a front, and now they were learning the difference. The turning point came when Chevrolet realized the 348 wasn't enough. The engine that was supposed to dominate wasn't dominating. The engine that was supposed to silence critics was creating more criticism. Something had to change, so they doubled down. In 1958, engineers bored the W-Series block even further than the original design had anticipated, from 4.125 inches to a massive 4.3125 inches. Stroke stayed the same at 3.25 inches. Displacement jumped to 409 cubic inches. The legend was born. On paper, the 409 fixed everything. Horsepower climbed to 360 with basic tuning, then 380 with more aggressive specifications, and eventually peaked at 409 horsepower in the most famous dual-quad configuration. That number was no accident. 409 horsepower from 409 cubic inches. Marketing loved it. Magazines loved it. Teenagers loved it. Torque soared past 420 pound-feet, enough to spin tires through 3 gears on a good day. In drag racing trim, with the restrictive exhaust removed and compression pushed to the limits of available fuel, some engines were making well over 450 horsepower, numbers that made the original 348 look like a warm-up act. The Beach Boys wrote a song about it. "She's real fine, my 409. But here's what most people don't realize. The 409 inherited the 348's weaknesses, every single one of them. Yes, it was faster, stronger, louder, more impressive in every measurable way. But the fundamental architecture didn't change. The combustion chamber was still compromised by that angled deck design. The heads still struggled to breathe compared to what Ford and Chrysler were developing. The block casting was pushed to its absolute limit, with cylinder walls thinner than engineers were comfortable with. Overbores for rebuilding were risky. Cooling remained marginal under sustained stress. Chevrolet was now locked into a design path they couldn't easily escape. And the war escalated fast. By the early 1960s, horsepower numbers were exploding across the industry. Every manufacturer was pushing harder. Every year brought bigger engines and more aggressive specifications. Ford unleashed the 406 and then the legendary 427 FE, engines that could breathe like race motors while surviving endurance events. Chrysler refined the Hemi into a monster that dominated everywhere it appeared, so thoroughly that NASCAR would eventually ban it to restore competitive balance. These engines could live at high RPM. They could survive 24-hour endurance races. They could be rebuilt and pushed harder without fundamental limitations holding them back. The W Series, it was already at the edge. Drag racers loved the 409 for short bursts. Quarter-mile heroics, where the engine only had to survive for 11 or 12 seconds at a time. High-profile wins that made headlines and sold cars. But sustained abuse? Road racing where engines ran at high RPM for hours at a time? NASCAR endurance events where mechanical sympathy was a luxury nobody could afford? That's where cracks began to show. Literal cracks sometimes. Chevy engineers knew it too. They had access to all the failure reports. They saw the broken parts. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the W Series had fundamental limitations that no amount of development could fully overcome. Behind closed doors, a new engine was already in development. An engine that quietly admitted the truth that marketing would never acknowledge publicly. The W Series wasn't going to win this war, so Chevrolet did something drastic. They scrapped the entire architecture. In 1963, the Mark IV Big Block program accelerated. This wasn't a refinement of the W Series. This wasn't an evolution. This was a clean sheet design that addressed every weakness the 348 and 409 had revealed. Flat deck surfaces allowed for proper combustion chamber design in the heads. True wedge combustion chambers gave predictable flame travel and even burn characteristics. Massive ports flowed air like nothing Chevrolet had ever produced. Thick cylinder walls allowed for overbores and provided strength under stress. Priority oiling improvements kept bearings alive under sustained high RPM operation. This wasn't an evolution, it was an admission of defeat. The new engine started at 396 cubic inches, then 402, then 427, then 454, and unlike the 348, these engines could grow. The architecture had room for expansion that the W Series had never offered. A 427 Mark IV could run 11.0.1 compression, make over 425 horsepower in street trim, and survive brutal race conditions that would have destroyed a W Series engine in minutes. Race versions pushed well past 500 horsepower. Some went higher. Torque numbers climbed toward 460 pound-feet and beyond. Most importantly, they lasted. The 348 and 409 were quietly phased out of production. The end came in 1965, without fanfare or ceremony. Tooling was scrapped. Blocks were melted down and the metal recycled into other projects. Chevrolet never looked back. Marketing never mentioned the W Series again. But the damage was done. The 348 had started a horsepower war before Chevrolet had the weapons to finish it. It forced rivals to accelerate their own development programs. Ford and Chrysler saw what Chevrolet was attempting and pushed their engineers harder in response. It exposed Chevrolet's limitations in big engine design for everyone to see. And it cost the company years of catch-up engineering, scrambling to develop the Mark IV while the W Series held the line as best it could. Yet somehow, despite all of that, the 348 also became immortal. Because the 348 wasn't remembered for losing, it was remembered for daring. It was the sound of late 1950s America, of wide highways stretching toward horizons that seemed to go on forever. Of neon lights and chrome bumpers and optimism that felt unlimited. Of full-size Chevys pulling hard from stoplights while their drivers grinned. Of drive-in movies and drag strips and Saturday nights that felt like they would never end. She's real fine, my 409. But under that song was a quieter truth. The 348 was the opening salvo. The engine that fired first, the engine that made everyone else respond. It couldn't win the war it started, but without it, the war might never have happened at all. And that's why the Chevy 348 still matters. Not because it was perfect, but because it was bold enough to start something bigger than itself. If you enjoyed this deep dive, let me know in the comments what engine or rivalry you want next. And make sure to subscribe, because there are plenty more forgotten battles in automotive history waiting to be told.